The grotesque sight of a Labour government scuttling out budgets and statements to drive some of the most vulnerable people in society into poverty or deeper into poverty. That's what Rachel Reeves, our Chancellor, is doing. I've got the brilliant James Meadway. This is kind of a tradition. We talk over terrible budgets and statements but by the government of the day. Obviously, we've done the Tories a lot, and now we have a total different change in political landscape under the Labour government. James, brilliant economist. Also, by the way, Macrodose, co-host of. Everyone check out Macrodose. So then you just get all this wisdom all the time, rather than my tradition. And it's a great tradition, but just get even more of it. So let's just start. 3.2 million Brits are going to lose from benefit cuts, an average of £1,720 a year. But talking about personal independence payment, which for those who don't know, is an in or it's not for people out of work. It goes to people in or out of work depending on their needs to secure their independence. It's for disabled people with very serious long-term conditions, to whether it be mobility, whether it be a carer. So 370,000 of those claimants and 430,000 future claimants will lose an average of £4,500 a year. Let's just talk about these, your sense, your response to these particular cuts.
Well, the headline in this is this is catastrophic on a personal level for many hundreds of thousands of people. That's what it means, right? You're talking about people who are already, whatever, sort of myth around benefits and the rest of it. I mean, these are people who are not well off. That's why they're receiving benefits payments. In particular, if you have a disability, the personal independence payment, as the name suggests, is a payment given to you so you can carry on living like a life that is integrated with what everybody else is doing, so you can participate in society. I mean, it's not enough, frankly, already. And it's been cut. It's been cut hugely. £4,500 average, by the way, suggests some people are going to get a lot more. Maybe some people a bit less, but some people could be facing a lot more than this. An average cut, £4,500 to what, 800,000 people on personal independence payments is an astonishing amount of money to be taking off people like that. The government's own forecasts, their own forecasts, say that 250,000 more people, including 50,000 children, will be pushed into poverty as a direct result of decisions that they've just taken on this. So these are catastrophic figures for thousands of people on a personal basis. And to do what for the government? I mean, to save, in the end, £4.8 billion just ahead of the next election. £4.8 billion for the government is peanuts. It's enough, and this is the entire aim of the exercise, it's enough so that Rachel Reeves can stand up and say to Parliament that the government's fiscal position now is exactly the same as it was in October. That's all that's happened. So in other words, the amount of borrowing and spending they were planning back in October left a certain amount of deficit out there for the government to borrow, and we've gone back to that position. So she's imposing this huge cruelty to basically stand still, to do nothing, right? To go round in little circles. When people talk about a doom loop, this is what it means. Because you force this onto a whole bunch of people who really are the most vulnerable, the people who are least able to bear it. You force these cuts onto them so the government can carry on doing exactly what it was doing anyway, right? There is no difference here. There's nothing that's got better. There's nothing that's improved. We can talk about the kind of fantasy forecasts from the OBR in a second, but the actual result of what's happening here is that we're trapped by Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules and the need for her to demonstrate today that the government's fiscal position is the same as it was in October, and that's it.
It's worth pointing out personal independence payments before these cuts. In fact, under the last government already, 30% of people with Parkinson's, for example, or Huntington's were being rejected for personal independence payment. A quarter of all amputees were being rejected. And the average claimant was still nearly £1,000 a month worse off because of the extra costs of their disability or health condition, even after they receive their personal independence payment. This point about a doom loop. I mean, why are we here in that set? I mean, because she presented obviously her budget last year after a load of doom and gloom statements by both her and Keir Starmer, which, I mean, they sucked demand out of the economy, didn't they? They suppressed consumer and business confidence and all the rest of it. Yeah. So I'm just interested what's happened, in terms of how, because they helped suffocate growth, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think they entered government, and this is there are occasions where you just think that there's a degree of, I mean, what would you call it? It's a particular kind of naivety right? And it comes out of apparently there's an Icelandic saying that everyone likes the smell of their own farts, right? So it comes out of that sort of belief when entering government that because you're the good people, like everybody else will kind of automatically respond to this, including like businesses looking to invest and international investors, everybody else. And everybody will now understand that the grown-ups are back in charge, and you just kind of sit there and wait for the investment to turn up and growth to return. And then you twiddle your thumbs effectively. Oh, twiddle your thumbs and by the way, cut winter fuel allowances. But otherwise, twiddle your thumbs for 3 months until you get to the budget in October, right? And that's what this government did. And it was just bizarre to watch that. Now, that's a fairly short-term reason for what's going on here. The bigger long-term reasons is this is the legacy of austerity that the last government did. This is the fact that, when we smashed into the financial crisis, now, 15 years ago, by the way, or approaching 15 years ago, we've been living with this bloody thing since then. The last government's response to that was say, we'll do austerity. The result was crippling productivity growth, pushing a whole load of people under the bus and into poverty, by the way, as discussed. I mean, when they tried tightening the conditions for benefits for personal independence payment back in 2011, 2013, there was a note in the British Medical Journal this morning that 290,000 people were driven into depression and other mental health problems. They reckon 600 people committed suicide. That's the effect of doing this. The bigger effect on the rest of the economy is that you don't get the growth. You're lumbering around with the government with loads of debt. Everybody's wages are going nowhere. Your salary's going nowhere. Everything's too expensive for most people. The economy's doing nothing. And then as far as I can tell, the basic plan for Labour arriving in office was, they'll do some stuff in the long term. We'll have investment and blah, blah, blah. All right, fine, whatever. Their basic plan was just because we're here, things will start to look better. They didn't, and we're stuck with this. Now, it is true that parts of the international situation look different now than they did back in October when Rachel Reeves stood up last. Donald Trump is president of the United States of America. There is all this backwards and forwards and tariffs and whether we're going to get tariffs in Britain and who else is going to get them or not get them, on for Mexico, off for Mexico. We've seen what's happened over the last few months with all of this. It's creating uncertainty. It's creating instability in the world economy. This is true. The difficulty is that, look, to be honest with you, we saw the opinion polls at least a year before that US election, and Donald Trump was going to win. So why did they not have a plan for this? Why did they not have a better plan than the kind of panic that we're now seeing from government? A panic that, by the way, results in this sort of desperate bootlicking on the part of Starmer and everyone else, and Donald Trump, as they say, please don't impose tariffs on us. I mean, that's the begging at the minute. Begging so much, by the way, that one of the minimal taxes that US big tech pays, the digital services tax, brings in about 700 million a year. Peanuts, by the way, for Microsoft, Facebook, all the rest of them. That's now being almost certainly going to be got rid of to try and appeal to US big tech and Donald Trump so we don't get tariffs. I mean, this is how pathetic the whole thing has become. So you stack all this up. The longer-term problem of austerity, the deep problem of a lack of investment in Britain, the short-term problem of Labour not planning for things properly once it got into government, that's where we get to. And who suffers from that? Some of the poorest and most vulnerable people in society, along with, by the way, if you look at the projections, even with the OBR being too optimistic, because they're always too optimistic, things don't look particularly good for the rest of us either.
I mean, with that, with 3.2 million Brits losing for benefit cuts, does this, the wider effect of you reduce the purchasing power of large numbers of people in terms of their ability to spend, and also people's health conditions end up deteriorating because they're not getting the support they need, and then that puts on additional costs. So that's an example of false economy that you say, well, we're making savings from this, but then we're already suffering the consequences of, obviously we've been suffering for a long time, of austerity, which is as you've explained, you've made people more ill, for example, you reduce people's purchasing power, and that's has wider effects.
Yeah, exactly. So people have less money to spend, so they don't spend as much. Everyone's getting squeezed anyway. Like, the cost of living crisis is ongoing. You go and look at opinion polls and ask people what they think their biggest problems are. Basic answer is cost of living, because stuff is still really expensive. And by the way, essentials like food and energy and water and all the rest are still going up. Is the government doing anything serious about that? No, of course not. It's kind of wringing its hands at best. So that is all still there. That is a squeeze on how much people can spend. If spending is squeezed, that means that the businesses who would otherwise get that money that people are spending aren't getting that money. They start thinking about making redundancies, not employing so many people. Some of the stuff we can see happening already, by the way, that's the kind of situation you get into. And you're also right about the knock-on effects. I mean, the false economy of saying we're going to cut disability payments, people we're living with disabilities. We're going to cut those payments, right? The fact is that this is driving people more and more into the acute healthcare system. You're going to get more people in the NHS with all sorts of illnesses. You can get more costs on the NHS because of that. Just quoted you the figures from the British Medical Journal on the really shocking increase in mental health issues that people have had as a result of what is happening here. You are stacking up more and more problems, more and more costs, not just for people who are suffering, but actually a cost on the services that are supposed to care for them still, like the NHS. This is so short term, it's not true. And all the sort of flapping about, in 5 years, everything's going to look a little bit better. We're all going to be, I think it was 0.5% better off as an average household in 2029 on the OBRs. And I'll say it now, excessively optimistic growth forecasts for the next few years. It's pathetic.
Well, on that, I mean, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, their figures suggest that the living standards of all British households will be lower by the time of the next election, but that'll be twice as worse for the poorest. And the reason that it's extraordinarily extractive for two reasons. Firstly, we've already gone through the longest squeeze in wages since the Battle of Waterloo, but also to have a Labour government preside over a fall in living standards that's particularly acute for the most poorest. How the hell is that? That is historically literally unparalleled, what we're discussing here in modern times. That does not strike me as sustainable.
No, I don't believe it is. I mean, there might be some calculation somewhere. You sort of think, you wonder sometimes what the plan is, right? And actually, like, to be fair to, as it were, to Reeves and some of the people around it, there were like large parts of this they've already laid out. They wanted to be a government that would go in, and this is the best possible interpretation, go in and kind of fix the foundations, as they say. So they'll make Britain a productive economy again. They'll drive up investment. I mean, buried amongst the announcements today was an increase in capital spending by government. In other words, investment in longer term things like new buildings and various bits of, I think it was the energy system and things like this. They're putting a £2 billion extra into. But this is extraordinary, by the way, because you're making this £5 billion cut to people's money that they need to survive and live decent lives, or as close as they can get to it on the minimal they get. You're cutting that, but putting in £2 billion on investment spending. Now, this isn't how Labour governments normally behave. I mean, most governments don't really behave like this ever that we've had. But Labour governments in particular, including New Labour, including Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, who oversaw big increases for the NHS, for schools, an improvement on things like working families tax credits, benefits going up for at least some people out there, a whole load of cruelty and terrible things as well, Sure Start centres, all the rest of it, the invasion of Iraq, bad. Yes, you can go through this list of bad things that happened under New Labour, but they did increase public spending. They didn't do cuts like this. There was a freeze in their first few years, but then it was actual improvements in things like the NHS and schools, stuff that people, care about, vote Labour to try and see an improvement in. Every other Labour government looks like that. This one doesn't, and it's not going to as things stand. So it's really unusual, and it's really running hard against, to make a political point, it looks to me like it's running hard against why people are still voting Labour. I mean, they didn't get a great vote last time. It was just better than the other lot. They didn't get a great vote already. And now they're just pushing hard at a bunch of people who might think, well, okay, they'll just do something. They'll make something a bit better. You're not getting any of this. It's quite extraordinary. It's extremely politically risky, because the last set of opinion polls I saw, of course, was Labour barely ahead, if not slightly behind, Reform.
But I mean, if I was going to be devil's advocate here, I mean, they would say, well, we are doing, this isn't austerity, and we shouldn't call it austerity because it will, I mean, I love the Daily Mirror, they've become comically. Rachel Rees argue defence cash will boost jobs and deny return to austerity. I mean, they're saying that's the point. They're saying about spending on defence, that's the argument. And also an increase of 1.2% a year, which sounds not huge, but in terms of day-to-day public spending. So it isn't austerity, that's what they say.
Yeah, this is kind of sort of technical quibbles that George Osborne and the Tories would use, that they kind of point to a few departments that are supposedly protected, like the NHS, which, and you can see how well that's doing in the last few years. And the spending was protected in real terms. But the trouble is with, for instance, the NHS, is that if you have an aging society, you've got more people who need the NHS, right? You get older, you're more likely to get ill. You're more likely to need the care and the treatment. That, by the way, is a really good reason to be looking to spend more more on care and looking after people who are sick than less. We have to think about the kind of society we actually live in and how it's going to work for people, not create fantasies about the growth you're going to get. You're not going to get growth if people are dropping out of the workforce because they're too ill to work, right? You're not going to get growth if that is happening. And that has been happening in Britain and other countries, developed countries across the world over the last 10, 15 years or so. So he's not thinking seriously about the world we live in. So when they say, oh, well, it's a bit of an increase across these departments, yeah, okay, it's a bit of an increase. The first budget that Labour presented was a pretty substantial increase, but then it's just nothing else. Everything drops off. And even that substantial increase was not going to be enough to keep the NHS in the manner to which we would like to see it. And that's not even like, back to, and I hate to say this now, but like the good old days of 2006 or something, when the NHS had some money and it was chugging along. It's not even dealing with the damage of the last few years properly, right? That is the problem when they say, okay, there's an increase in spending. Sure, but it's not enough. And it's allied to these whacking great cuts in that other bit of government spending, which is the money it gives to people because they need support.
Finally, then, they bet everything on growth. That was the whole, they just talked about growth all the time. And now they're downgrading growth forecasts. Just kind of how did we end up? What is there any hope that they will turn that around? They're talking about, back the builders, building, construction, Heathrow, which is something which, to be fair, governments have spoken about since 2008, regardless of what you think about the environmental case against that. What's our pithy alternative right now?
Well, look, the growth stuff, it was never going to work. And it was sort of, you wonder what they were thinking of I do wonder, because it was bizarre. You can sit there and go, oh, yeah, we get growth. It's like, even with a spectacular return to growth, even with like an amazing 4 or 5% growth, sort of growth we haven't had for decades, since like the 60s in this country. Even if you got that, it's still not going to produce enough new taxes to pay for all the repairing the public services that we have and still meet your precious fiscal rules. So none of this made much sense. What's happened since is that the forecasts look even worse for this year. The growth forecast has been halved, and then the OBR say, oh, the official officer budget responsibility, the official forecasters say, oh, it gets better from here on afterwards. But as I say, you can go and see the hilarious graphs of their forecasts, which are always like growth going up. Every time they're asked to do a forecast, growth goes up, and every time growth going nowhere. For the last 15 years now, they've been like this, right? So they're going to be wrong about this one. It's a fair bet. So growth isn't going to happen. The stuff they're talking about, producing growth, the reforms to planning, all this sort of thing, we're going to build. Okay, sure, it's going to make some stuff happen, assuming it happens. If the forecast for that particular thing comes out right, sure, okay, we get some new houses built. The impact on overall growth is small because it's just a small part of the economy if you go and do this, right? You're looking at on their figures, it's fractions of a percentage additional on growth by the time of the next election. It's nothing. You don't get that. It was a complete, again, I'm being generous here, right? It was a complete overstatement of what growth could achieve to go into the election last year and say, this is the secret sauce. This is the magic that will sort everything out. It's not going to. We live in a very unequal society, one of the most unequal of the set of developed economies. What we need is redistribution. So when people raise things like a wealth tax on those who have more than £10 million in wealth, which is an absolute fortune. I hardly need to stress the point. This is an extraordinary amount of money to have. 2% wealth tax and that for £24 billion you could bring in. These are the kind of measures that you need to be talking about if you want public services that work and an economy that functions, because it's that way round, by the way. You've got to get people fit and healthy and cared for, educated, well looked after. Then you can start to think about what might happen with growth. You don't get growth so that by some alchemical process, everything else starts to work properly. You've got to look after people. That's how you get growth if that's what you want. We are failing badly and failing worse now as a result of today on that fundamental point.
Rachel Reeves destroyed with facts and logic. That was brilliant stuff, James. A real tour de force. It did eviscerate. It's just, I'm just wrapping this up, but it's everything, isn't it? It's just think about New Labourers. They were substantial people as well. And these are just budget middle managers with no coherent ideas or vision at all. It's a devastating reality, though, for this country, and the dangers, of course, is a general slide towards fascism. So no pressure there. Please do share this video. Get everyone to listen to James destroying with facts and logic, Rachel Reeves and the economic so-called strategy of this government. Press like and subscribe. Leave your comments. Great to hear always from you. But James, thanks so much as ever.
Thank you.
And listen to Macrodose.